Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and this video was supposed to be a review of J.D. Salinger's 9 stories, which I already knew, some of them, but which I only read as a collection in its entirety very recently. But then as I was thinking about it, as I was putting down some thoughts about the review, I realized that I noticed some very strong parallels between these stories and the stories of F. Scott Fitzgerald, in particular a collection called The Diamond as Big as the Ritz, which I read some time ago. Diamond as Big as the Ritz is published by Wordsworth Classics, but it's actually a collection of stories from different moments in Fitzgerald's oeuvre, and different publishing houses will probably piece together other stories, or you may even have editions that follow the original collections published by Fitzgerald in his lifetime. And the main similarity between these two literary cases, of course, is that both of these writers published novels that were so popular and so canonical and that play such an important role in the American literary canon that they kind of damaged the rest of their works, the rest of their oeuvre. The Great Gatsby in Fitzgerald's case, or The Catcher in the Rye with Salinger, are pretty much the one work by these writers people usually read. And I myself was very surprised when I tackled these works to see their scope, their creativity, and how simply very good they were. Salinger's 9 stories admittedly are probably a bit more widely read than Fitzgerald's short stories are these days, and for some good reasons too. Perfect Day for Bananafish is widely anthologized, very well known, and a complete shocker. When I read it, I truly wasn't expecting the story to go in the direction it did. It seems to me like the literary equivalent of the Goodbye World sketch from the ASDF movie, but if one stops at the first 2 stories in the collection, Bananafish and Uncle Wiggily in Connecticut, or also if you go to another very famous piece as For This Man with Love and Squalor, you might think that this is kind of a homogeneous collection and that it deals with a theme, the theme of being shell-shocked, having post-traumatic stress disorder after World War II. Of course, if you know anything about even just a few details about Salinger's life, you will probably connect the dots and believe that Salinger in these stories is describing his own trauma upon coming back to America after World War II. But the point is that beyond these stories, which are beautiful and brilliant short stories, beyond them there's a world to be discovered in this very slender volume. By the way, my own edition deserves a look, because it's a Russian edition. It's written in English, but the notes are all in Russian, and it's self-destructing as I read it, as you can see. But I have some work to do once I'm done filming this. One of the most striking things about these short stories is how seminal and influential they are. Just as with some works by Pynchon, or by Hemingway, or with stuff such as On the Road by Kerouac, this is the kind of book that, as you read it, immediately, even if you've just read some American fiction, you can see how it was later replicated and reproduced and used by American writers throughout the decades. The kind of humor you find in the 9 stories, their approach even just at plot, the way they often revolve around a single episode. Maybe they are kind of plotless, but at the same time they always revolve around some satisfactory twist or development or epiphany, call it what you will. That's something you find extensively in American literature, and I personally am not the biggest fan of American literary short stories. I usually find them maybe a little bit too cold and sometimes rather plotless, but here they're just handled so well. Possibly my very favorite story from the collection is called The Lumiere Myths, yes, Blue Period, and it is a humorous, a comic piece about this French kid who was born in America, comes back to live there when he's 18, becomes a teacher at an art school and falls in love with a nun, which, when I put it this way, it sounds like it has an awesome plot, but in terms of its plotting, in terms of the events as they develop, there's nothing much there at all, even in terms of resolution, even in terms of personal growth. I'd be hard-pressed to find even one of those epiphanies people always talk about in the story, or at least it's not so evident, is what I mean, but it's just written in such a humorous style. It's so engaging, it's so honest in a way. It makes fun of the main character even while addressing some pretty serious stuff. that it's such a rewarding experience. It also features some very quotable lines about how happiness is a solid and joy is a liquid, and about the fact that being an artist makes you slightly unhappy all the time. And then the last story, Teddy, is not quite science fiction, it's not at all science fiction, but it's borderline speculative fiction in that it deals with this wunderkind, who is this kid who somehow is already a sort of philosophical genius and corresponds with some of the world's greatest professors. The variety you encounter in that collection is astonishing, as it is in The Diamond as Big as the Ritz, in Fitzgerald's stories more broadly. Possibly because The Great Gatsby is so influential, and possibly because of assumed notions about the rest of Fitzgerald's oeuvre. I was sort of convinced that everything he wrote was in the same key as The Great Gatsby, and you find plenty of that in his short stories. In stories such as Mayday or Babylon Revisited, you encounter those same tales of people from the jazz age, the 20s, the 30s, people who are filthy rich, but maybe they lost everything, or maybe they still have everything but they're still somehow miserable and cannot really find a point in life beyond getting drunk all the time, and even when they achieve what they supposedly were after, they cannot quite be happy all the same. But at the same time, there's much more than that in Fitzgerald's short stories. And The Diamond as Big as the Ritz, the title story in this collection, deserves to be read absolutely by everyone. It's a novella, call it what you will, it's a long short story, and it almost seems like something H.G. Wells wrote, except of course in Fitzgerald's lush, baroque, very elegant, very antiquated and yet very modern style. Fitzgerald is posed at precisely the right moment in history, has to be an incredible pleasure to read if you like your fiction with some frills. Even just Hemingway, especially his short stories, can feel so much incredibly colder, and of course also very much more modern for that same reason. But what I want to say is that Fitzgerald's short stories have a broader appeal even to non-specialists, non-readers, to people who maybe are not that interested in literary history, I believe. And that Diamond as Big as the Ritz is not some metaphor about, I don't know, the American wealth in the 1920s. It's an actual diamond that is as big as a hotel, even bigger actually, and it's an amazing, that one is an amazing, fantastical fantasy story that taps into this idea that wealth cannot possibly grant people happiness. In fact, it makes them slightly mad. There's more common ground there between Salinger and Fitzgerald. Both of them are concerned with the highest classes in American society, people who are wealthy, people who are successful, and with the fact that in spite of all this, not only are they unhappy, but they are unhappy in peculiar, sometimes rather sick ways. Except, of course, Salinger describes that side of society after World War II, Fitzgerald does it after World War I. But again, when I draw these comparisons, it seems to me that I'm not doing justice once more to the variety and diversity of these collections. There's a short story in here called The Lease of Happiness. I'm talking about Fitzgerald. And it may be the most beautiful piece of writing I've read by Fitzgerald. It's without all those trails I talked about. It's very down to the bones. It's very cruel even when it comes to its plot, and it has a plot, but it's not like it has the most astonishing or twisted narrative structure. In a way, it almost feels to me like Fitzgerald doing Raymond Carver, if that makes sense, and it doesn't. They are completely different writers, but it just goes to show what Fitzgerald was capable of, what was in his writing arsenal. The Lease of Happiness is bleak, it's cruel, it's straightforward to the point of pain, and then it strikes you with maybe a paragraph, maybe 2 sentences of lyrical beauty that just break your heart. It's hard to oversell the emotional impact of these short stories and also their humor, how fun they are, both in overt, laugh-out-loud ways and in a more ironical, more subtle way. If, like me, until recently you only knew these writers from their major works, from Gatsby and Catcher in the Rye, I absolutely recommend that you explore their oeuvre more widely. I absolutely plan to check out the rest of their bibliography. It shouldn't be too difficult with Salinger. As I understand, it's not like he published huge volumes. Fitzgerald, I know of several of his other works, it will take more work, but I absolutely plan to do that in the course of the next few years. Let me know about your favorite stories by Fitzgerald, but also by Salinger. Let me know what you think about these writers beyond their major works, and let me know if there's any other writer out there where you feel like some of his works, or her works of course, maybe are unjustly ignored because they have a novel or a collection out there that it's too famous for their own good. And thank you as always for watching. In a second you'll find links on the screen to some others of my review, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Bye guys.